Hi, I'm Nancy Chanteau, and this video is about anxiety and also trauma and how we desensitize our physical responses to stress. Um, so one of the things that I've noticed, I had created a desensitization practice, primarily thinking that when people are dealing with trauma, since trauma memory is stored in the limbic brain, that we needed to desensitize that memory or the limbic response in order to have people be able to recover from trauma. And this is the principle that EMDR works on. That if you basically use an intensity practice to help the body recover from a fight or flight response, that around a particular traumatic event, that you can desensitize, or they would talk about taking something that's like full 3D surround sound video to being like a black and white postcard. So I took those principles and applied them to trauma and started creating desensitization practices for clients. And what I noticed was that people wouldn't really remember to do the practice around a particular traumatic event. So what I noticed also is that I was using that same desensitization practice with people who had anxiety, that if they had anxiety, I would say, okay, well, let's create a 0 to 10 stress scale, and anytime you get over a 3 on the stress scale, do the practice. And you want to try and do it, after you wake up in the morning and before you go to bed, make sure you're under a 3, and anytime you go over a 3 on the stress scale, do the practice. And those folks, after a couple of weeks, would report that their insomnia and anxiety-based insomnia would be reduced, that their overall feelings of anxiety were reduced, that they were feeling great, they were able to do things they hadn't been able to do in a long time, and it really had worked for them. And so what I started doing was, instead of having folks who have trauma histories do the practice anytime they got triggered around their trauma, I would just have them do the same practice anytime that we go over a 3 on a 0 to 10 stress scale. And I would use 3 as being a level of stress in our bodies that we can put our attention on and still can't let go of. So a 3 is a little bit of that in our body. Anything above a 3 is more stress than if you pay attention to it, it doesn't reduce the stress, or it doesn't reduce the stress enough. That you would do these desensitization practices. And what I discovered was that anybody who did the practices with regularity would have really great results, and their reports of instances of getting triggered around a trauma would go down. So I'll teach you the practices, and I'll talk about what it is that works about these practices. So what we're looking for intensity. The limbic brain stores memory really differently from the neocortex. The neocortex, something happens, and even within maybe an hour, our ability to recall that event with clarity diminishes. It starts diminishing immediately. Short-term memory and long-term memory store memories really differently. Our memories become something that have less recall, and what we pay attention to in our memory really will have more accuracy. But we're not necessarily recalling the memory based on an image or a video. I mean, there might be an image, but it's not like being there again. Our memory isn't stored that way in the neocortex. Neocortical memory will be relational and associative. So we might remember that we had ice cream last Thursday, and then think about the time we had ice cream when we were a child. So there's an association between that ice cream and this ice cream, that association is being made inside of the brain in the memory structure. So limbic memory doesn't work like that. It stores it based on intensity. Limbic memory is stored based on intensity, and it's crystal clear. People report feeling like they're back in an accident or a war zone or a particular traumatic event, that it's happening again. And the limbic brain recalls that memory when there is an association, a stimulus that is similar to this experience, the intensity experience. So a particular smell, a particular temperature. I had a woman tell me once that every time the temperature went up in April or May, that she would have a trauma response to that, because that was when she would get abused. So that kind of physical sensation-based association, that there's the memory is being recalled, and the reason that the limbic brain is doing that is to try and keep us safe. That this is a safety. This is the limbic memory system is an aspect of the safety system, and the whole point of that memory system is to try and help us be safe. So the memory is getting recalled. It's getting recalled based on intensity. It got stored based on intensity, and so naturally you can't do anything to overwrite that part of the memory system without intensity. And the great thing, I mean, the bad thing and the good thing about the limbic brain is that it's completely based on intensity. It's not storing based on an idea or an association. It's based entirely on how intense your experience is, and that's what stores it. So, but you can actually reduce the intensity of the recall by doing a practice. Every time you think of that thing, or I mean, essentially what I've discovered is that anytime you're stressed in any way, if you desensitize the stress, it actually takes care of all of this memory recall process. So so repetition is really important, intensity is really important, and the third thing that's really important is intention. We want to be doing this practice from our wise adult consciousness, from this place of connecting with our desire to make things different, and also from our awareness of this isn't the same situation as that. It's not dangerous. We're not going to desensitize something that's actually physically dangerous to us. We want to leave our danger system intact. We just want to desensitize things that are getting red flagged and causing stress without having any. That's not helping. So obviously, if we're in I had a friend call this pre, present, and post trauma, where trauma is kind of happening all the time. Desensitizing might still help, because our safety system, our danger system, will still respond to the danger that we're dealing with. And the amount of consciousness that it would take to do that, we'd have to be much more engaged in a current practice of self-trust, self-love, and doing the best we can to take care of ourselves within that context, given, the degree of powerlessness and the degree of danger that we're facing. So, this isn't an approach designed for that. If you are experiencing pre, present, and post-trauma, I would much more encourage you to see somebody who's really trained to help, either one-on-one or, so that you can get specific help with your context, or somebody who's experienced with working with people who are in that context. And, that's part of life. People are in those contexts, and they're dangerous and scary, and it's important that we support each other and get help there. I just want to make a claim that this video could help you with that. This is much more for people who have had an intensity experience, or are having kind of a high level of stress that isn't grounded in what's actually happening, or even if it is grounded in what's happening, the stress, the baseline stress being high is actually making things worse. So we're going to bring the baseline stress level down, we're going to bring your anxiety down, and then you will have more resilience and ability to cope with whatever is happening. And if you ever have any questions about whether or not your circumstance warrants desensitization, or if the desensitization would somehow be dangerous to you, I'd be happy to talk it through with you. You can just get in touch with me through my website. Okay, so the practices that I've honed in on as helpful, there's 4. I'm going to talk about the ones that I'm not going to walk you through first, and those are singing or humming, or drinking hot or cold liquids, or both. Either one of those are highly intense and could totally work. I see people choosing those as secondary choices, because the other 2 that I'm going to teach you tend to be much more powerful. And if you're in a car, hot and cold liquids might be the best thing that you could use. You could also hum or sing in a car. So you might choose to use those in a situation where tapping or holding your breath might not be the ideal option. But I tried to pick practices that people could do anywhere, and in public or in the grocery store line, because one of the things that really makes a difference in embodying these practices is repetition, and we want to be able to do it when it's coming up. And doing these practices in public can be, it's great if we can do them while we're in a meeting or something like that, to support ourselves. So if we're having a stress response to whatever is happening. The other reason that you want to really build your repetition of practice with these practices is that you want to think of them when you're stressed. So if we do successful practice and then aren't stressed so much anymore, the baseline stress comes down, and then we forget that practice was useful, then we're back to reinventing the wheel next time we get stressed. And newsflash, life is stressful, and you're gonna need a stress reduction practice for the rest of your life. There's gonna be times that are stressful, so it's really great if you put a bunch of reps into one practice instead of having to remember which practice was helpful the next time you get stressed, because every time we're stressed we tend to have less capacity to make decisions and less energy to make decisions, and having something already in place can be really helpful. So the two that I primarily teach, one is called Blending with a Contraction, and I learned this from Stacey Haynes, Generative Somatics. She wrote a book called Healing Sex, and she's my teacher for somatics and trauma. And this practice is a breath holding practice. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do first, and then we'll do it together. So you're going to take a deep breath, full inhale, full exhale, and at the top of the next inhale, you're going to hold your breath and squeeze all your muscles. You hold and hold and hold and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, and then at the end of the breath, you let all of your air out with an exhale, whoosh. And then as you're doing that, relax all of your muscles. Imagine a waterfall coming down your body, taking away all the stress and tension. Or it could also be a colored water, like amber colored liquid or something like that, to take away all the stress and tension. And then this is really important. We come back to normal breath. So it might be 10 or 20 breaths, 2 or 3 minutes. This is just as important as the intensity practice, is this return to calm. And that we're doing this with the intention and understanding from our wise adult consciousness that this is something we're doing in order to try and heal ourselves and to calm ourselves and to reduce our stress. So one thing I want to say about this practice is this is a breath holding practice. So if you know breath holding practices are bad for you, you can just skip it and skip ahead. There's other practices, or the tapping practice is next. If you have asthma or any kind of constricted breath or breathing difficulties, definitely this practice might not be for you. You do a very light version of it rather than an extreme version of it first time to see if it actually relaxes you. And there's a percentage of the population that holding their breath and squeezing their muscles is actually really stressful. So if that's you, also don't do this practice. This is contraindicated for anybody that has any kind of heart conditions or any kind of risky health. So this practice is more for folks who can handle, even though it's not for very long and it's not very intense, it's actually a pretty high amount of intensity if we're in a fragile state. So, use this practice with caution. And if it doesn't work for you, there's other practices. And if you can't figure out a practice based on this video, I can help you look at your life and what you're doing and pick something out of your existing practices that you're already doing to help you. So just make sure that you're taking care of yourself as we do this. So now we'll do this practice together. I'm going to walk you through it. You should be able to follow along as I walk you through it. I'm not going to do it exactly. I'll kind of demo it though. So take a full breath inhale and a full breath exhale. And then on your next inhale, hold your breath and squeeze all your muscles. So you'll squeeze your face, squeeze your jaw, squeeze your shoulders, squeeze your rib cage, squeeze your legs, squeeze your toes, squeeze your butt, squeeze, 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 hold, 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 squeeze all your muscles as tight and as hard as you can, squeezing and holding until you need to take a breath. And on your next exhale, release your breath and release all of your muscles. Let all of that holding go. And let yourself come back to normal breathing. Now this practice can cause anxiety in some people. So if you're one of those people, discard this practice. You don't need to do it ever again. It's a small percentage of the population, but some people will actually feel stressed by that practice. It's too close to things that were stressful to them before. So especially if you have asthma or any kind of breathing difficulty, that practice might not be the ideal practice for you. And then, so we're just waiting for normal breath to return. You might notice elevated heart rate. You might notice that you're breathing a little bit more deeply or rapidly than you normally would. And we really want to totally let the heart rate and the breath come completely back to normal. So we'll just keep waiting until that happens. I'm still having a little bit of an elevated heart rate, a little bit of elevated breath. So, and I wasn't doing the practice fully because I was talking you through it. So the likelihood is you're probably still in an elevated state. And this wise adult consciousness, really attending to ourselves, really noticing that the breathing is still being altered by the practice, that we're still not fully back to normal breath, that these things are, this is how we develop our self-responsiveness. And self-responsiveness is one of the first steps to building self-trust. So, which self-trust is necessary for self-love. This is all practices of self-love, building that capacity and understanding and an ability to do that. So probably by now you will be back to a normal breath. If you need more time, you can hit pause on the video and then start it again when you feel completely back to normal breath. So you also, I wanted you to check your stress level before you start the practice and then check it afterwards. So just notice where on the 0 to 10 scale, stress-wise, you would be now. And I noticed I had a little bit of pain in my shin because I barked my shin this morning. Aside from that, I have a little bit of achy low back. If I put my attention on it, the achy low back doesn't really, it relaxed a little bit, but it's not really relaxing all the way. I'm probably hovering between a 2 and a 3 right now on the stress scale myself. So, but that practice definitely relaxed me. Wherever I was before, I probably went down 1 or 2 points on the stress scale just doing that practice as much as I did it. So the next practice, and if that practice works for you, I just really highly recommend it. It's a great practice. And you want to do it and repeat that practice until you get under a 3 on the stress scale. So if it takes you 2 or 3 times to do it, you would follow the same exact routine. It's just that you would, and you would wait for normal breath in between each one. So it might take, if you needed to do it 3 times, it might take 15 minutes to do all 3 rounds. You just want to notice if you start getting diminishing returns or it increases your stress instead of reducing your stress. Let go of that one and try something else. Okay, so this is the next practice is a tapping practice, and this comes from EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. I don't teach EFT the way that it's taught in terms of there's this whole sequence of tapping and you tap all over your body and you tap in a particular order. That's not, that amount of tapping is really obvious and wouldn't really work in a public space. What I found is that people generally can tap their chest, the sternum, like in this place below the collarbones, and they can generally tap the sides of your legs. You can't see me doing it, but I'm tapping the sides of my thighs right now. So I'll just lift my leg so it's like this, the sides of the thighs. And so we'll be doing tapping like that. You can tap the chest, tap the sides of your thighs, tap your jaw, the sides of the temple, in between the forehead, in between your eyes, above your mouth, below your chin, any of those places. Also, the sides of our arms can be a good place to tap. This is the fight-flight meridian in Chinese medicine, the triple warmer. So tapping the triple warmer can be really helpful. You can tap the forearms as well. So whatever place, tap all of those places and see if one of them appeals to you. I tend to like to tap the sides of my legs. And you could, one of the things that's great about tapping the sides of our legs is that you can do it in a meeting under the table. You can just do it with one hand. You don't have to do it with both hands. It's pretty intense. Tapping any part of our body is intense no matter where we tap. So what I like to do is, again, start with a full breath inhale and a full breath exhale. And then on your next inhale, we're going to start tapping. And we're looking for, on the exhale, letting go of all stress and tension. So you can kind of imagine that the tapping is breaking open or releasing any stress and tension in your body. And as you tap it, the exhales, you can let that tension go. You can imagine the waterfall coming down your body. And we're going to do this for 3 to 5 breaths. And there's usually a gestalt feeling, like a place where the practice really feels like some relaxation has arrived. And again, when we start this practice, it's good to check our baseline stress before we begin, because we're going to want to measure it after we're done. So that's about 3 to 5 breaths. On this next exhale, I'm going to let the breath go, and then I'm going to let my hands come to stillness on my body. So if I was tapping my chest, I might bring my hands to my chest. And you want to pick a feeling of soothing, so I can place my hands on my thighs or my chest, or if this felt soothing, I could leave my hands here. Wherever you feel like you're connecting with yourself, you're supporting yourself, you're saying, I'm here, and I'm doing this practice with intention and deliberation and repetition to relax. And again, we want to come back to normal breathing. It won't take as long. This practice tends not to be as disruptive as the blending with the contraction practice. And for some people, this is much more amenable of a practice and much more relaxing than the breath holding practice. I personally tend to like the breath holding practice a little better. It's a little bit more intense, and it gives me a better result. It's really up to you what works best for you. So by now, each breath, letting go of all tension and stress. You can check your baseline stress level again. Notice where you got to. And I notice that now that I've done that tapping, that the low back place that was achy on me before is gone. So I definitely went down to a 2 or a 1 on the stress scale during that practice. So I just demonstrated the results while we did it. That tapping practice, obviously, I was able to do more than the breath holding practice while I was talking you through it. So those are the 2 practices that I demoed. You can also do the humming or singing. You can do the drinking hot and cold liquids. You can drink hot or cold liquids, or you can go back and forth between them. That's definitely intense. And just like with the other 2 practices, you want to pay attention to what you're experiencing and your sensations. Notice that and remind yourself that you're doing the practice to help yourself calm down. As you swallow or as you notice the sensations, you can release tension with your breath. Work on relaxing your body. The same with the singing. So a lot of singing might not actually have a good result, whereas if you sang, a tone for 3 to 5 breaths, you could om or something like that, you might actually get a better result. So the intention, the repetition, even the brevity of the practice can be part of what's useful about it, because you're completely focused in doing the practice, not on the thing you're doing, but on the relaxing that you're doing. So the relaxing is the important part of the practice, not the actions of the practice, if that makes sense. So when you're singing or humming, it's not to sing a song, it's to relax while singing or humming, because that's an intensity practice. So you do the practice, get yourself below a 3 on the baseline stress, on the stress level. You could also, if numbers don't work for you, you could just use a felt sense in your body, like I feel stress in my stomach, or I feel tightness in my chest, anything like that. You could use a felt sense to guide you to do the practice instead of a scale, a felt sense of stress, whatever that is. So we're just looking for some sort of cue. You could also just do it 3 times a day, or set an alarm and do it at in the morning when you get up, at 10 a.m., at 2 p.m., and the end of at the end of the day when you go to bed. Whatever works for you. We're really looking for both being able to deal with stress in the moment and also to bring the baseline stress level down. And this practice can really help people who have free-floating anxiety. It can practice people with trauma histories. It can help people who have very situationally stressful situations in their life, circumstances. And one of the things to really remember about these practices is that we're doing them from that place of intention, wise adult consciousness. I'm doing this to heal myself. I'm doing this to take care of myself. I'm doing this to relax, from repetition, doing it with high frequencies so that we get it embodied. It takes 300 repetitions to get something into muscle memory and 3,000 to change from one thing to another. And we're doing it with intensity. So this physical intensity to help the safety system stop getting triggered by whatever is stressful. So I hope that this this orientation to stress, anxiety, and trauma can help you work with your trauma and or your anxiety or your stress, and make your life better, so that when you get stressed, you can bring your baseline stress level down and just deal with what's happening instead of dealing with our history as well as what's happening. That's really the biggest difference, is that, accrued stress in the body, if we don't let go of it, adds on to anything that we're experiencing. And very often that add-on is the difference that would mean us being able to do something constructive or not do something constructive, to make different choices, to get replenished, and to do the things that we need to do in order to get through the stressful situation. So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them, or you can get in touch with me on my website at www.nancyshanteau.com. That's spelled Shanteau. Looking forward to talking to you soon. Hope this helps.